They said the bus would drop me at the hotel. I wake to a plastic bracelet biting my wrist and a cot with a thin gray blanket that smells of bleach and old soup. Light is the flat kind, fluorescent, unsentimental. Someone coughs wetly nearby. Metal legs scrape. A woman is praying under her breath, the same two words over and over like she's stitching herself to the morning. Ma'am? A shadow leans over me, all key lanyards and practical shoes. You with us? Name? My mouth is lined with sleep and dust. Mary Ellis, I say, and it sounds like I'm introducing a stranger. My purse is under my pillow, zipper still closed, the way I learned to keep it when I travel alone. I touch it. The familiar bulge of my pill organizer presses back. Small mercy. I'm Tasha, the woman says, tablet propped on her forearm. Intake. You came in late. Said you were tired and needed a place for the night. Any medical we should know about? I was told there's a reservation, I say, though the word hotel won't pass my lips. It feels too shiny for this room. A room with my name. Tasha's face does that careful social worker thing, soft, but fenced. We'll see what we can find out. For now, breakfast is hot. I sit up slowly. My knees object. They always do, like old neighbors who think they own the street. Around me, the shelter hums to life. Cots fold, plastic bins slide. A volunteer rolls in a cart that rattles with dented mugs. A boy too young to be hard already wears that guard dog stare. Beside me, a woman with a tidy bun and a coat, folded like a napkin, says, "First day? You kept saying sea view in your sleep." I don't talk in my sleep, I say, then hear my voice. Thin, stubborn, unconvincing. What's your name? Inez. She offers me a peppermint from the pocket of her cardigan. Sugar helps. They keep the coffee strong. The bracelet is the paper kind, glossy and cheap, printed with Ellis, M, and a barcode, like a small insult. I work a nail under it, and Tasha notices from across the room. Leave it on for now, she calls, not unkindly. Makes it easier for staff. Inez smiles with only the left side of her mouth. Easier for staff. Hear that? Not for us. She pats my hand anyway. Her skin is dry as newsprint. Don't worry. First mornings feel like you fell asleep on a bus and woke up underwater. I stand. The floor is gritty, the way floors get when 100 shoes argue with them. On the wall, someone has taped up a sign with printer ink too light to read unless you lean in. No outside food, no weapons, respect quiet hours. I'm 74 years old, and I'm reading rules as if I might fail them. In the cafeteria line, a man in a hairnet ladles oatmeal that remembers being hot. I carry the tray like it's going to accuse me of something. A volunteer offers bananas with brown freckles. You want one, ma'am? He asks, eyes kind, voice tired. Yes, I say. I add 2 sugar packets to the oatmeal to please Inez and taste nothing but the memory of heat. Across from me sits a woman in a blazer, too nice for this place, flipping through files. She glances up. We're short on beds tonight, she tells Tasha. Church group's already full, day room's maxed. Tasha nods. We'll triage. Inez taps my wrist. That means decide who's in and who's on their feet by 10, she whispers. You got anywhere to go? I have somewhere to go, I say, and watch my breath fog the lukewarm coffee. After breakfast, they move cots to a closet with a door that doesn't quite close. The room looks like a theater after the audience leaves, stale, bright, disappointed. I follow Tasha to a small office where a plastic plant droops and a calendar shows last month. She points me to a chair that weighs more than it looks. Mary, she says, typing, tell me what happened yesterday, Just the short version. I got on a bus, I say. They told me it would drop me off at the hotel. Who's they? She doesn't stop typing. The ones who said they'd take care of it. I fold my hands to keep them from shaking. My family. The word tastes like a chip of ice. I had an itinerary printed. Somewhere. She waits. I dig in my purse. Lipstick, receipts, old mints fused to their wrappers. No itinerary. But my pill case is there, blue as a robin's egg. My ID, my Medicare card, my bank card in its sleeve. I breathe. It's possible the driver, perhaps there was a change. Tasha's look says she's heard every polite explanation pain can invent. Do you know the hotel's name? Seaview, I say, and the room hears it now. The word that belonged to last night and a different kind of morning. Seaview Harbor. She writes it down. City? Brighton Cove, I answer, and it is like naming a country you once lived in. We'll call, she says. Phones go out at 9 when the desk opens. Before that, I need to ask, any safety concerns at home? Anyone who might have kept you from getting where you intended to go? I meet her eyes. Mine are steady. They've had a lifetime to practice. I am not missing, I say. I am misplaced. Tasha allows herself the smallest smile. All right, Ms. Misplaced. We'll start with the hotel. Then we'll figure the rest. Back in the common room, the TV fights with the sound of plastic bags. A weatherman waves at rain we can't feel. Inez has claimed a sturdy chair near the window and saves the one beside it with a scarf. When I sit, she nudges my elbow. See that guy at the door? Security. He'll pretend he doesn't hear you unless you stand right in front of him. And the lady with the blazer? She's nice until 3. Then she turns into rules. Learn the faces. It helps. I won't be here that long, I say. It comes out quiet, but not weak. None of us planned on it, she answers. That's why you fold your blanket neat when you leave. Even if you never see it again, you tell the room who you are. I smooth the bracelet once, decide to keep it for now, and tuck my purse strap under my arm. Somewhere a clock stutters and remembers its job. 9 o'clock will come whether I dread it or not. The phones will ring. Someone at a desk in a clean lobby will answer, with a practiced smile in their voice. And I will say my name like a promise that still belongs to me. I woke with that same knot in my stomach I'd gone to bed with, the one that had kept me staring at the ceiling half the night. You don't sleep well when you've decided to break a lifetime's habit of swallowing your pride. The bus ride yesterday, the lies, the shelter instead of a hotel. Those weren't just mistakes. They were choices. Choices someone made because they thought I wouldn't fight back. The shelter's coffee was thin and bitter, but it burned away enough of the fog in my head to let me think straight. I sat at a small table in the corner, hands wrapped around the paper cup, watching the others shuffle in, some with bags under their eyes like mine, some with eyes that had given up long ago. I didn't want to be here a day longer than necessary. My purse was still with me. Inside, my wallet. Inside the wallet, my bank card, my ID, and the small notebook where I kept numbers. Amounts lent, bills paid for others, promises made and broken. I'd been writing in it for years without realizing I was also writing my own indictment of them. Page after page of my life converted into receipts and favors. I called the bank from the shelter's payphone, my voice steadier than I expected. Yes, I'd like to suspend all automatic payments and revoke a power of attorney. The young man on the other end sounded surprised, even concerned. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. All I wanted was that first clean break. By the time I walked out of there, The winter air bit at my face, but it felt almost welcome. I stopped at the corner bakery, not for myself, but because the woman behind the counter, Marta, had always given me more than I paid for. She slid an extra roll into the bag without a word. Sometimes kindness is in the smallest, quietest acts. My next stop was the lawyer's office. Not the family lawyer. He was too intertwined with their affairs. I wanted someone new, someone who didn't know my son's smile or my daughter-in-law's polished lies. A woman named Harris met me in a cramped office lined with books. She listened as I told her what I wanted. No more access, no more assumptions, and a will rewritten to reflect who had truly stood by me. Her pen scratched quickly, but her eyes stayed on mine. She didn't pity me. I appreciated that. By the afternoon, my phone had rung so many times I turned it off. I couldn't bear to hear their voices yet, dripping with sudden urgency now that the tap had been shut. I walked home instead, taking the long way. Past the riverbank, past the church where I'd once baked pies for every fundraiser, past the row of trees that still held the wind like an old memory. When I reached my front steps, someone was sitting there. My granddaughter. Hers was the one voice I hadn't been avoiding. She stood as I approached, her eyes wide. "Grandma, what's going on? Dad's in a panic." "Inside, over tea," I told her. Not all of it. Just enough that she understood this wasn't sudden madness on my part. She listened, hands wrapped around her cup, a frown between her brows. "I've seen how they treat you," she admitted. "I just didn't think you'd ever—" She trailed off. "Neither did I said. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to lightness. That night, I took out my old blue dress and hung it where I could see it. I didn't know yet when I'd wear it, but I knew it wouldn't be for them. Not unless it was on my terms. The morning after felt different. Not softer. No, nothing about this was going to be soft, but clearer. Like the moment after a storm when you can see the wreckage for what it is. The shelter was behind me now, but its smell, its echo, stayed with me. I could still hear the cough of the woman on the next cot, still see the paper bracelet crumpled in the trash. I made oatmeal at home, the real kind you cook slow, not poured from a packet. The kettle hissed. My house, my table, my chair, it all felt both familiar and foreign, like returning to a place after years away. I thought of how close it had been to losing it. One signature, one more temporary arrangement, and I could have been gone from here for good. I wasn't in the mood to sit still. I walked into town, scarf tight around my neck, eyes sharp for the small details I'd missed in my years of habit. At the library, the same one where I'd taken my children when they were small, I asked for a computer. My hands shook a little as I typed, first my name, then my address, into the county property search. There it was. My name was still listed, but something new sat beneath it. A pending transfer of ownership, filed just 2 weeks ago. To a trust, managed by my son. My throat tightened, but not with surprise. It only confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that the hotel trip had been a step in a plan. I printed the page and slipped it into my purse. The librarian, a boy young enough to be my grandson, glanced at me like he wanted to ask if I needed help. I smiled the kind of smile that tells someone to mind their own business. Back outside, the air had warmed enough to smell the river. I headed toward the bus stop, but halfway there I stopped. The bank was across the street. I didn't plan to go in, but my feet had other ideas. Inside, the teller recognized me. Years of small deposits and Christmas checks for the grandchildren will do that. I asked for a balance, and then I asked to move a large portion into a new account, one in my name only, no joint access. Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't question me. By the time I walked out, the sun was dropping low, washing the street in that late afternoon gold that makes even cracked sidewalks look beautiful. I passed a cafe, and through the glass I saw my son's friend, the one who'd been a witness at their wedding, laughing into his phone. He didn't see me. Back home, I pulled the printed property record from my purse and set it beside the blue dress. 2 reminders, one of what they'd tried to do, and one of what I still had. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Tomorrow, I'd start with a call to that lawyer. Tonight, I'd make tea and sit in my chair, not as someone waiting for an invitation that would never come, but as someone planning her next move. I woke before the alarm, though I hadn't set one. At my age, you don't need clocks. You have the habits of decades, and lately, the kind of restlessness that drags you out of bed, whether you want to be up or not. The kettle went on, and while it hissed, I laid the printout from the library on the kitchen table. The words, "pending transfer of ownership," looked bolder in the morning light, like they were daring me to ignore them. I wasn't going to. By 9 o'clock, I was in the lawyer's office again. Ms. Harris wore a deep green jacket and that same expression, professional but not pitying. I liked that about her. I slid the printout across her desk. "It's them," I said, "trying to get my house without asking me to leave it." She read it, then leaned back. "You still have full title. This filing is an attempt, not a completion. We can block it. We can also find out exactly who initiated it and when." That was the first moment in days I'd felt something close to relief. "Do it," I said. While she tapped at her computer, I looked around the office. No family photos, no clutter, just shelves and a pot of red geraniums by the window. I thought of my own mantle, lined with pictures of people who could lie to me without flinching. Ms. Harris printed forms, explained each one slowly, and had me sign. We added a clause to my will, a change to my banking instructions, and, her suggestion, a formal letter revoking any powers of attorney. By the time we were done, my hand ached from the pen, but the knot in my chest had loosened. Back on the street, I stopped at the corner store for bread and milk. The clerk, a girl with dark braids, smiled and asked if I needed a bag. I almost said no. Habit. But then I thought of the papers in my purse and said yes. You carry certain things close, where they can't be knocked from your hands. At home, I made a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter. The phone rang halfway through. I recognized the number and let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Persistent. I turned the volume down. In the afternoon, Inez from the shelter called. "You all right, hotel lady?" she said, voice dry but warm. "Better than I was," I told her. "Better than they expected me to be." She laughed, a short, knowing sound. That's the trick, isn't it? Let 'em think you're small, then show 'em you're not. After we hung up, I went to my closet and reached for the top shelf. It took a chair and some careful stretching, but I pulled down the old tin box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters from George, a few savings bonds, and the deed to the house, the original, with my name in bold ink. I set it beside the blue dress. 2 anchors, one for where I'd come from, one for where I was going. And tomorrow, I decided, I'd make my first unannounced visit in a very long time. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. That was the point. For years, my visits had been polite, planned affairs, announced days ahead so my son or his wife could tidy up just enough to pretend nothing had been said behind my back. This time, I wanted to see things as they really were. The morning was crisp, the kind that wakes you up before the coffee does. I took the bus instead of calling a cab. Less obvious. I sat near the back, watching the streets change from my quiet neighborhood to theirs. Newer houses, bigger driveways, hedges trimmed like they were afraid of growing wild. When I got off, I walked slowly up the street, giving myself time to notice everything. A for sale sign 2 houses down. Kids' bikes on a lawn. And there, my son's silver Lexus in the driveway, polished enough to catch the sun. No one in that house was hurting for money. I knocked twice. No answer. I was about to turn away when I heard movement inside. Voices, quick and low. Then the door opened. Cora stood there, hair perfect, smile a shade too tight. "Mary," she said, as if my name tasted sour. What a surprise! "I was in the neighborhood," I said, stepping forward before she could block the doorway. The living room was as spotless as a furniture showroom, but there was a stack of unopened mail on the console table, and the top envelope had the bank's logo on it. I kept my eyes moving, casual. She offered me coffee, and I accepted, not because I wanted it, but because sitting gave me more time. Wesley came down the stairs, phone in hand. He froze for a fraction of a second when he saw me, then plastered on a grin. "Mom, I didn't know you were—" "Of course you didn't," I said lightly. "I didn't call." The 3 of us sat. They asked small questions, the kind people use to fill time, about my health, the weather, a neighbor's dog. But there was tension in the way Wesley kept glancing at Cora, as if silently asking what I knew. I didn't bring up the shelter, the hotel, or the transfer of ownership. Not yet. Instead, I asked about their anniversary dinner. Wesley's eyes flickered. Cora looked at the floor. "It was lovely," she said finally. "I'm sure it was," I replied, holding her gaze until she looked away. After an hour, I stood to leave. Cora walked me to the door, her voice dropping low. "Mary, whatever you think you know, it's more complicated than that." I smiled the kind of smile that isn't an answer. Life always is. Outside, the air felt colder than when I'd arrived, but I also felt sharper, clearer. They were nervous, and that was a start. On the bus ride home, I opened my purse and touched the edge of the property printout. I still hadn't played my hand. Not yet. Sometimes the best way to win is to let the other side think they still hold the cards. For now. The next morning, I woke with the same steady purpose I'd felt on the bus ride home yesterday. The visit had been worth it. Not for anything they'd said, but for the way they'd looked at each other. That flicker of unease was better than a confession. It meant they knew I wasn't just going to fade into the background. I made tea and took it to the kitchen table, setting out my papers like a card player arranging her hand. The deed, the property transfer printout, the letter from Ms. Harris revoking every scrap of legal access they'd had to my affairs. I read each one slowly, the way you savor something that belongs entirely to you. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. It was Inez from the shelter again. "You still stirring the pot?" she asked. "More than that," I told her. "I'm rewriting the recipe." She laughed, a deep, raspy sound, and then her tone softened. "Just remember, sometimes they bite back. Make sure you've got your teeth in first." After we hung up, I decided to take a walk. I ended up at the small diner on the corner of Elm and 3rd, the one George and I used to go to on Sundays. The waitress, Ruthie, still remembered my order. Scrambled eggs, no toast. She leaned on the counter, shaking her head as I told her a bit of what had happened. Families, she said. They'll smile at you over pie and take the fork right out of your hand. From the diner, I went to the hardware store. I didn't need tools, but the owner, Sam, had been friends with George. He came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, and told me how someone, he wouldn't say who, had been in last week asking if my back door lock was easy to change. He'd told them it wasn't for sale unless I ordered it myself. My spine went cold, but my voice stayed steady. Good man, I said. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait for them to make another move. Tomorrow, I'd go to the bank in person, not just to shift money, but to place every account under a security code known only to me. And after that, Miss Harris and I would file whatever needed filing to make the property transfer impossible. That night, I sat in the armchair by the window with the blue dress laid over my lap. I traced the pearl buttons with my fingertips. It wasn't about wearing it anymore. It was about remembering that I could still walk into any room with my head high. They might have thought they'd written me out of the story, but I was just getting to the part where I pick up the pen. The bank smelled faintly of polished wood and printer toner, clean, efficient, impersonal. I preferred it that way. I didn't need warmth here. I needed precision. A young man in a suit I could have bought him for Christmas last year greeted me with the kind of brightness they teach in training. Good morning, Ms. Ellis. How can we help you today? I need to secure all of my accounts, every last one, I said. No changes, no withdrawals, no access without my direct, in-person approval, and I want a password, one only I know, required for every transaction. He blinked once before nodding. Of course. Let's get you seated with a senior account manager. The manager was a woman about my granddaughter's age, but she carried herself like someone who didn't flinch easily. I explained, in broad terms, that I'd recently become aware of attempts to act on my behalf without my consent. She didn't press for details, just began typing. We set up the password, a phrase only I would understand, something George had once whispered to me at the beach, long before children, long before trust became something you had to lock away in a vault. While she worked, I asked her to pull up the list of any pending transactions connected to my name. There were 3, 2 small utilities, 1 large, a transfer to trust, scheduled for the end of the month. Cancel it, I said. It hasn't been authorized yet, she replied, but I'll remove it from the system entirely. When she handed me the confirmation printout, I slid it into my purse alongside the property transfer document and the deed. 3 pieces of paper, 3 lines of defense. On my way out, I stopped at the public notary desk and had copies of everything certified. If my son or his wife wanted to make this ugly, I'd make sure they learned I knew how to play ugly back, legally, cleanly, and without apology. I left the bank and decided to walk the long way home. The air carried the bite of late autumn, the kind that makes you want to tuck your chin into your scarf. I passed the school where Wesley used to pick up his daughter, my sweet Claire, before everything between us turned into polite silences. Near the corner, a car slowed beside me. His car, the silver Lexus. The passenger window rolled down, and Cora leaned toward me. "Mary, we need to talk," she said, voice tight. I kept walking. "Then talk," I said, without looking at her. She hesitated. "Wesley's upset. He thinks—" "I know what he thinks," I interrupted, "and he knows why." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It doesn't have to go this way." I stopped then, just enough to meet her eyes. "It already has." She didn't answer, just rolled the window up, and the Lexus pulled away. I stood there a moment, letting the cold sting my cheeks, then kept walking. Back at home, I laid the certified papers on the table. 3 anchors, steady and unshakable. I made tea, sat in my chair, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. A calm born not from pretending everything was fine, but from knowing I'd put real walls between myself and those who thought I was theirs to move around like furniture. I knew they'd try again. People like that don't give up after the first locked door. But they'd find the next one locked too, and the next. And if they kept pushing, they'd learn the truth. I'd lived alone before. I'd built my life before them. And I could do it again without blinking. I didn't sleep much that night, but not from worry. My mind was working in a different way, measuring steps, weighing angles, remembering the details most people miss. At my age, you don't waste energy on dramatics. You plan, you pace yourself, and you strike when it matters. By mid-morning, I was at the library again. The same boy from last week was behind the desk. "Computer?" I asked. He gave me a number card without a word, though his eyes followed me as if he remembered the last time I'd been there. I typed my name into the county court records this time. It took a while, but there it was, an intent to transfer property form, filed electronically, no witness signatures, no physical visit to the clerk's office, coward's work. I clicked to open the attached document, and there, in the neat, impersonal text of legal forms, were the words that made my stomach turn. Initiated by power of attorney, Wesley Ellis. Except he didn't have that anymore, not legally, which meant 2 things. 1, he'd filed it before I revoked it, or 2, he was lying to the court. Either way, I printed the record. Then I searched his name. My son's name, on public documents, tied to more than one trust, not just mine. One of them belonged to a man I knew, Harold Jensen, who used to live 2 streets over, now in a nursing home. A pattern was beginning to take shape, and I didn't like the look of it. I folded the papers and slipped them into my purse. From the library, I walked to Ms. Harris's office. She was in with another client, but her assistant took one look at the documents and said, "We'll add these to your file, and we'll request the electronic log to see exactly when and from where the filings were made." I left feeling steady, almost cold inside. Cold is good. Cold keeps you from making mistakes. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. In the canned goods aisle, I ran into Claire, my granddaughter. She hugged me quick, like she was afraid someone might see, and whispered, "Grandma, Dad's been saying you're confused, that you don't know what you're doing." I met her eyes. "Do I look confused to you?" She shook her head. "No. You look sharper than I've ever seen you." I touched her cheek. "Good. Remember that." At the checkout, I paid in cash. Small habit, but one that leaves no trail for anyone with wandering eyes. Back home, I added the new papers to the growing stack on my dining table. The blue dress hung on the chair beside it, almost like it was keeping watch. I sat, sipped my tea, and thought of the next step. Not defense this time, but offense. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to make sure they couldn't try this with anyone else again. The wind rattled the kitchen window that morning, a sharp, restless sound, like the house itself was urging me forward. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, staring at the stack of papers I'd built like a fortress. Deed, bank statements, certified copies, court filings. Proof. But proof isn't enough if it just sits there. I needed the kind of action that makes people wish they'd never started down this road. I called Ms. Harris first. "I want to move on Harold Jensen," I said, without preamble. She was quiet for a beat. "The neighbor? The one in the nursing home?" "Yes. I think Wesley's been doing to him what he tried with me." I told her about the trust in Harold's name, about the filing dates that lined up too neatly. She didn't interrupt, just let me talk until the words stopped. Then, "All right, we can contact Harold's court-appointed advocate. If what you suspect is true, they'll open an investigation." When I hung up, I felt that cold steadiness again. It wasn't joy, not satisfaction, just the clarity that comes when you finally see the whole picture. Around noon, I decided to dig into my own past decisions. I went into the spare room, once a sewing space, now mostly boxes, and found the file marked legal. Inside, under faded receipts and warranty slips, was the original power of attorney I'd signed for Wesley. The date on it made my stomach tighten. 4 years ago, right after my surgery, when I was still fogged from painkillers and too tired to read the fine print. I remembered him saying, "It's just in case something happens, Mom." Something had happened, all right. I slipped the document into my purse. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a breadcrumb. The kind that could lead right back to him if I placed it in the right hands. I took the long walk to the nursing home where Harold lived. The place smelled of antiseptic and lavender air freshener, the same mix every facility uses to try to soften the edges. Harold was in a wheelchair by the window, watching a squirrel pick at the grass. "Mary Ellis," he said, voice raspy but bright. "Haven't seen you in years." I sat beside him and kept my tone light. "I've been keeping busy. Harold, can I ask you something? Has anyone been helping you with your bank or your house?" He frowned. "Your boy, Wesley, right? Said he was doing me a favor. Papers to sign so the state wouldn't take the place if I had to stay here." My stomach knotted. "Do you remember when that was?" He shrugged. "Last spring, maybe." I patted his hand. "Would you mind if I passed your name to someone who can make sure everything's been handled fairly?" He chuckled. "Handle away. I've got nothing left to lose." I left the nursing home with more than I came for, a witness, however fragile. Back home, I called Ms. Harris again. He confirmed it. Wesley got him to sign papers last spring. "I'm bringing you the original power of attorney from my own file. You can match the handwriting, the notary stamp. It's all there." She didn't say "good job" or "I'm sorry." She just said, "Bring it in tomorrow. We'll move fast." I hung up and set the kettle on. The house felt quieter than usual, but not in a lonely way, in a prepared way. The kind of quiet before a chess move you know will change the game. I sipped my tea, looking at the blue dress draped on its chair, and thought, not for the first time, that people mistake age for softness. They forget how much you learn watching the world try to take from you, piece by piece. I wasn't just going to keep my house. I was going to make sure Wesley never stood on someone else's doorstep with those same papers in his hand again. The morning felt heavier, like the air itself had weight. I woke before the sun, pulled on my sweater, and laid everything out on the table. Harold's story, my power of attorney, the court filings, the certified copies. I wanted it all in one place, ready for when I walked into Ms. Harris's office. By the time I got there, she was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee. No pleasantries, no warm-up, just a nod toward her desk. "Let's get to work." I slid Harold's name across first. She scanned the note I'd made, then the original power of attorney. "Same notary stamp," she said, tapping the corner. "Same handwriting on the witness line. Whoever handled this wasn't even careful enough to change their habits. That's because they didn't think they'd have to, I said. They thought we'd just let it happen. She opened a new file on her desk, labeled it Ellis, Potential Criminal Matter, and began making a list. First, we contact Harold's advocate. Then we file a formal objection to the transfer on your property, citing lack of valid authorization. At the same time, we lodge a complaint with the county clerk regarding fraudulent use of a revoked power of attorney. We want this on record before they can make another move. It was clinical, methodical, exactly what I needed. No theatrics, no outrage, just the slow tightening of a net. While she typed, I asked, "What happens if this turns criminal?" Her eyes lifted from the screen. "Then it stops being your word against theirs. It becomes the state's case." I nodded. Good. When I left her office, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked 2 blocks over to the community center. They had a legal aid desk there once a week, and I wanted to know if anyone else had complained about similar issues. The volunteer, a man in his 60s with reading glasses sliding down his nose, looked up from his forms. "Funny you ask," he said. "We've had 2 seniors in the past month with almost the same story. Family, helping them sign documents they didn't understand. Different names, but the setup sounds alike. I left my number with him, just in case. Patterns aren't always easy to prove, but once you see them, you can't unsee them." On my way home, I stopped for groceries. In the parking lot, I spotted Cora again, leaning against her car, scrolling through her phone. She saw me, froze, then pasted on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mary," she said, too brightly. "We were just about to call you." "Don't bother," I replied, walking past her toward the store. "I'm handling things myself." Her voice followed me. "You don't have to do this." I didn't turn around. "Yes," I said, "I do." Back home, I added a new folder to my growing stack, labeled Other Victims. Maybe it was premature, maybe it was too much, but something told me this was bigger than me. That evening, the phone rang. I expected silence after the click, but instead, a familiar voice spoke. "Harold's. Your lawyer called," he said. "Said I might get my house back." "You will," I told him. And I meant it. When I hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights flickering on one by one. People walked past my house without a glance, never knowing how close it had come to belonging to someone else. I rested my hand on the back of the chair where the blue dress still hung. Not yet, I thought, but soon. And when I wore it, it wouldn't be for show. It would be because I'd earned it. The next morning, I was at the kitchen table before the sun had fully risen, pen in hand, writing a list that was less about remembering and more about committing myself. Once it's on paper, you can't pretend it was just an idea you might get to later. At the top, I wrote, "Finish closing every door they could use." Ms. Harris had filed the objections yesterday, but I knew better than to assume that meant the game was over. People like Wesley and Cora didn't take one setback and walk away. They circled, tested the edges, looked for cracks. My job was to seal them before they even thought to knock. First stop was the post office. I'd kept the same P.O. box for years, mostly for the occasional letter, but now I had all my mail rerouted there. No more envelopes left in my street mailbox for anyone to accidentally collect. The clerk, a wiry man with ink stains on his fingers, stamped the change of address form and said, 3 days and it's all coming here. I left with 2 keys, one for my purse, one hidden in the seam of my coat pocket. From there, I went to the utilities office. Power, gas, water, every account had been in my name alone for decades, but I still added a password and a note. No changes without in-person verification by account holder. The woman at the counter didn't ask why. She just typed, nodded, and slid the confirmation sheets across to me. By noon, I was at the locksmith's. Sam from the hardware store had already warned me someone had been asking about my back door. I gave the locksmith the same instructions I'd give a surgeon. Work fast, make it strong, leave no trace of the old weakness. He replaced both front and back locks with heavy deadbolts, then handed me 3 new keys. "These aren't easy to copy," he said. "Keep track of every single one." I told him he didn't need to worry. After a quick lunch at home, I opened the tin box from the top shelf again. Inside, beneath the letters from George, I found the small photo album I hadn't touched in years. In the back, I slid an envelope containing 1 certified copy of every important document: deed, court filings, bank changes. If my house ever did get broken into, I wanted proof somewhere they wouldn't think to look. In the afternoon, Inez called again. "Heard from one of the ladies here," she said. "Your name came up. They said you're making a fuss." "I'm not making a fuss," I replied. "I'm building a wall," she cackled. "Same thing, if you do it right." The rest of the day, I stayed quiet, letting the rhythm of small chores settle my mind: laundry, sweeping, a pot of soup simmering on the stove. But my thoughts were never far from the stack of papers on the table. Every lock, every password, every rerouted letter was a stitch in the net I was tightening. Just before dark, I stepped outside. The street was quiet, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke. Across the way, the porch light at my neighbor's flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a car idling at the far end of the block. The shape of it was familiar. I didn't move toward it, didn't wave, just stood in my own doorway until the engine turned over and it drove away. Back inside, I bolted the door and set the keys in their place. This wasn't fear. This was preparation. And preparation is what keeps you standing when someone decides you're easy to move. I sat in my chair, the blue dress still hanging beside me, and realized I'd done it. I'd closed every door they could reach. Now it was only a matter of time before they understood there was no way back in. I didn't plan the meeting. I let it happen. Some things work better when you don't give the other side time to polish their lies. It was Saturday morning, cool and bright. I took the early bus toward town, but instead of getting off at the market like I usually did, I stayed on until the stop near Wesley's office. I knew he sometimes went in on weekends, old habit from his real estate days, before he learned there was more money in other people's signatures. Sure enough, his Lexus was parked out front. Cora's sedan sat beside it. My reflection in the glass door looked steady enough, though my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Wesley was behind his desk, phone in hand, mid-sentence. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Mom!" Cora came out from the back room, a folder in her hands. "Mary," she said, tone too sweet to be real. "We were just—" "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't raised, but it cut clean through the room. I walked to the chair opposite Wesley's desk and sat without asking. "I'm not here to listen. I'm here to tell you how this will go." They exchanged a glance, the silent kind that says they still think they're in control. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers, setting them on the desk one by one. The deed, the certified court objections, the bank's transaction report with the canceled trust transfer, and finally, the county filing showing Harold Jensen's name alongside Wesley's. "I know what you've been doing," I said. "Not just to me, to Harold, to others, and I'm done pretending I don't. Cora's smile faltered first. Wesley leaned back, trying for casual, but his knuckles whitened around the edge of the desk. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I cut in. You used my trust. My age. You thought I wouldn't notice because I've spent my life giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's over. Cora set the folder down. This could get messy, she said. It already is, I replied. Here's what's going to happen. You will stop every action on my property, my accounts, my name. You will not contact me except through my lawyer, and you will stay away from Harold Jensen and anyone else you've cornered into signing something they didn't understand. Wesley shook his head, that same disappointed father look he used when I refused to take his advice. And if we don't? I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. Then the county prosecutor gets this file, and you can explain yourself under oath. The silence stretched. Finally, Wesley spoke, voice lower now. You'd do that to your own son? You did it to your own mother, I said. For a moment, I thought he might argue. But instead, he glanced at Cora, and something passed between them. Something that looked a lot like calculation, giving way to resignation. I stood, gathered my papers, and slipped them back into my bag. I'll give you one chance to disappear from my affairs quietly. Don't waste it. As I walked out, I didn't look back. The air outside felt sharper, cleaner, as if the building itself had been holding its breath. On the bus ride home, I watched the town roll past. Storefronts, children tugging at their parents' hands, the church doors swinging open for a wedding. Life going on, the way it always does, no matter who wins or loses the smaller battles. When I reached my street, I paused at the gate and looked at my house. My house. Every brick seemed to stand taller than it had a month ago. Inside, I hung my coat, set my bag on the table, and touched the blue dress draped over its chair. I wasn't ready to wear it yet. But soon, and when I did, it wouldn't be for defense, it would be for victory. The day I came home for good was quieter than I'd imagined. No grand arrival, no neighbors waving from their porches. Just me, a ring of new keys in my hand, and the familiar weight of my purse on my shoulder. The locksmith had finished the work while I was at the meeting with Wesley and Cora. The locks gleamed, untested, like polished armor. I slid the first key into the front door, felt the smooth resistance, and stepped inside. The air was different, still my home, but carrying traces of someone else's presence. A faint, sweet scent that wasn't mine. The living room looked orderly at first glance, but the details told another story. My armchair angled slightly wrong. The photograph of George and me, usually in the center of the mantel, pushed to the side. I walked through each room slowly, letting my eyes adjust to what had changed. In the dining room, the china cabinet door was ajar, one plate missing from the set. Upstairs, the drawers in the guest room were empty, Claire's old quilts gone. I stopped in my own bedroom. The closet smelled faintly of cedar, but the top shelf, where I kept the tin box, was bare. For a moment, my heart kicked hard in my chest, until I remembered that I'd moved it myself, days ago, to a place they'd never think to look. Even so, the absence was loud. This wasn't just about taking things of value. It was about reminding me that they could reach in and touch my life without asking. That they had. I put the house back in order, one small act at a time. Armchair straightened, photograph centered, cabinet door closed. It wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about reclaiming the space. making it answer to me again. When the physical work was done, I boiled water for tea. While the kettle heated, I stood at the window, watching the late afternoon light slide across the yard. My neighbor's dog trotted along the fence line, tail wagging. The ordinary scene grounded me, reminded me that most of life carries on untouched by the storms in our private worlds. After tea, I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. I thought about George, about how he'd kept every tool in perfect working order, how he'd always said a home needed tending like a garden, consistent, careful, and with an eye for trouble before it took root. I'd been gone from my own home for too many days, but now I was here. And here, I intended to stay. That night, I moved the blue dress from its place on the dining chair to the hook on my bedroom door. Not because I planned to wear it tomorrow, but because it belonged in a space I'd taken back. It felt like hanging a flag after a battle, not to boast, but to say, "This ground is mine." Before bed, I made one last walk through the house. Every window latched, every lock turned. I touched the back of each chair, the edge of each table, the smooth wood of the banister. Familiar things, retaken. In the stillness, I realized the victory wasn't loud. It didn't feel like shouting. It felt like closing the last door against the cold and knowing without doubt that it would hold. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, one I hadn't felt in years, not because everything was back to how it had been before, but because I'd built something steadier, stronger, a life where no one else held the keys. Each morning, I started the same way. Tea at the kitchen table, sunlight creeping across the wood, the blue dress hanging on its hook where I could see it. A reminder, not of loss, but of what had been defended. Inez called often. "You still standing tall, hotel lady?" she'd ask. I'd tell her yes, and sometimes I could hear her smile through the line. She'd pass on bits of shelter gossip, who'd found a new apartment, who'd been back twice in the same week. We never said it out loud, but we both knew what she was really checking for, whether I'd slipped back into silence. I hadn't. Ms. Harris kept me updated. The county clerk had officially voided the property transfer attempt. Harold's advocate had filed his own objection, and an investigator was looking into a pattern of questionable transactions. The phrase made me think of quilt squares, each incident a neat piece, harmless on its own, but when stitched together, revealing the whole design. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Wesley and Cora had been quiet since our meeting, but quiet could mean planning. Still, the balance had shifted. They knew now I could fight, and that I would. One afternoon, Claire came by. No text beforehand, just a knock on the door. She looked nervous, as if she wasn't sure which version of me would answer. I made tea, and we sat at the table, steam curling between us. "Dad's not happy," she said finally. "I wouldn't expect him to be." She hesitated. "He says you're making this worse than it is, that you don't understand what he was trying to do." I met her eyes. "I understand exactly. That's why it's stopping." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached for my hand. "I'm glad you're different now. Stronger." I squeezed her fingers gently. "I'm the same. You're just seeing more of me than before." When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her walk down the street, shoulders squared in a way that made me wonder if maybe strength could be passed down like a recipe. That evening, I opened the tin box. I didn't need anything from it. I just wanted to see it was still there. The papers, the letters from George, the envelope of certified copies. all intact. I touched the deed, the raised seal cool under my fingertips, and felt the same quiet pride I'd felt the day we signed it all those years ago. A week later, Ms. Harris called with news. "The investigator has enough to proceed if Harold's willing to testify," she said. "And we've got at least 2 other seniors who've described nearly identical tactics." "Will it go to court?" I asked. "It could. But even if it doesn't, your son's not going to be able to try this again without someone watching." After we hung up, I sat for a long while in the quiet, listening to the slow tick of the kitchen clock. I thought about the kind of mother I'd been, the compromises I'd made, the times I'd smoothed over trouble instead of calling it out. I thought about how easily that habit could have ended with me in a shelter for good, my home in someone else's name. Not anymore. That night, I took the blue dress from its hook and laid it across the bed. The fabric was cool and soft, the pearl buttons still firm in their threads. I ran my hands over it, not with nostalgia, but with the certainty that one day soon I'd wear it again. Not for them, not for anyone else's approval, but for myself. When I put it back, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The lines in my face hadn't softened, but my eyes were sharper, steadier. I thought of what Inez had said the day we met in the shelter, that first mornings feel like you've woken underwater. I wasn't underwater anymore. I was on solid ground, and the house around me, my house, felt like it was breathing with me. Some victories don't roar. They stand. They endure. And they wait for anyone who might be foolish enough to try again. I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in shadow. For a long while I sat at the kitchen table, hands around my mug, listening to the creaks and sighs of the walls. This place had held me through joy, through grief, through storms inside and out. And now it had held through this, through people I once trusted trying to slip it out from under me. The fight was quieter now. No more papers to file, no locks left to change, no accounts waiting for passwords. The fortress was built. What remained was something different, something like watchfulness. The kind you learn from tending a garden. Weeds will always try to return, but you know where to look for them now. Inez called mid-morning. "Heard from a lady here," she said. "Said she's got a nephew sniffing around her will. I told her your story." "My story?" "Yeah. How you went from hotel to shelter to making them wish they'd picked an easier mark." She laughed, low and knowing. Said it gave her ideas. After we hung up, I thought about that. How one person speaking up could loosen the knot in someone else's chest. I'd spent too long believing silence was dignity, when really it was just permission. In the afternoon, I walked to the post office. The clerk handed me a small stack of mail, all addressed to the P.O. box now. Among the bills and catalogs was a letter from Harold. His handwriting was shaky, but clear enough. They said I can keep the house. Thanks to you. I sat on the bench outside and read it twice, the sunlight warm on my shoulders. It wasn't just relief for Harold. It was proof. Proof that pushing back mattered, that it worked. Back home, I brewed tea and sat in the armchair by the window, the blue dress hanging across from me. For weeks it had been a symbol of something waiting, something not yet claimed. Now it felt like an invitation. I took it down, smoothed the fabric, and buttoned it slowly. It still fit, not just in size, but in spirit. In the mirror, I saw the same face, the same lines, but behind them, something steadier, not softer, not harder, just certain. I walked through each room, the sound of my steps against the floorboards familiar and grounding. In the dining room, I touched the table where my papers had been spread like battle plans. In the living room, I straightened the photograph of George one last time. In the hallway, I rested my hand on the banister, feeling the weight of the house as if it were an extension of myself. Before evening fell, I stepped onto the porch. The air carried the first chill of winter, but it didn't bite. Neighbors passed, some waving, some not. The street was the same as it had always been, but I stood on it differently now. I thought of all the women who'd been told to be quiet, to be grateful, to let things slide. How many of them had been left with nothing but memories in exchange? And I thought about the ones still in that place, wondering if speaking up would make them look foolish or unkind or ungrateful. Here's what I know now. Silence feeds the kind of hunger that never stops. And dignity isn't in swallowing your pain. It's in standing so firmly in your own life that no one can move you without your consent. So if you're reading this and someone is circling your home, your money, your name, don't wait for them to take the first bite. Lock the doors. Guard the garden. Say the thing they hope you'll keep quiet. Because you are not theirs to manage. You are not furniture to be rearranged. And if they don't like the sound of your voice, let them learn what I've learned. There's no age limit on drawing a line and daring someone to cross it.